I stood in front of my son's house, my heart racing with anticipation and a mix of emotions. It had been 12 years since we last spoke, and I wasn't sure what to expect. We had a complicated relationship, to say the least. He was always a rebellious child, and as he grew older, he became more and more distant. I took a deep breath and walked in, calling out his name. The house was messy, with clothes and papers scattered everywhere. I saw a notice from the bank on the table, and my heart sank. I knew my son was in financial trouble, but I had no idea it was this bad. My son walked out of his room, looking disheveled and tired. "Dad, I can explain," he said, but I just handed him a folder with a single sheet of paper that would change everything. He looked at the paper, and his eyes widened in shock. "What is this?" he asked, but I just shook my head. "You should have thought of that before you ignored me for 12 years, I said. He looked at me, and for a moment, I saw the little boy I used to know. But then, his expression changed, and he became defensive. "You don't understand, Dad," he said. I sighed, feeling a mix of emotions. I wanted to help my son, but I also wanted him to take responsibility for his actions. "I understand more than you think," I said. "I know you're in deep financial trouble, and I'm willing to help you. But you need to be honest with me, and you need to be willing to make some changes." He looked at me, and I could see the wheels turning in his head. He knew he needed my help, but he was also scared of what I might do. I could see the fear in his eyes, and it broke my heart. "I'll do whatever it takes, Dad," he said finally. "I just don't know what to do." I looked at him, and I saw an opportunity. I could help my son, but I could also teach him a lesson. I could make him understand the value of money, and the importance of responsibility. "I'll help you," I said. "But you need to be willing to listen, and you need to be willing to learn. Can you do that?" He nodded, and I could see the relief in his eyes. I knew I had him right where I wanted him. "Good," I said. "Then let's get started." I sat down at the kitchen table, and my son followed suit. I pulled out a piece of paper and a pen, and began to explain my plan. "First, we need to get a clear picture of your finances," I said. "I want to see all of your bills, all of your debts, and all of your income. We need to know exactly where you stand." My son nodded, and began to gather up his papers. As he handed them to me, I could see the embarrassment in his eyes. He knew he had made a mess of things, and he was ashamed. I took the papers from him, and began to sort through them. The more I read, the more I realized just how deep in trouble my son was. He had credit card debt, loan debt, and even a few overdue bills. It was a wonder he hadn't been sued yet. As I read through the papers, my son sat quietly across from me. He knew he was in trouble, and he was waiting for me to tell him just how bad it was. Finally, I looked up at him and said, "Okay, let's talk about this. You owe a total of $120,000 in debt, and you're making just enough to cover your minimum payments. You're living paycheck to paycheck, and you're one step away from bankruptcy." My son looked at me, and I could see the fear in his eyes. He knew he was in trouble, and he didn't know how to get out of it. I leaned forward and said, "But here's the thing. I'm willing to help you. I'm willing to give you the money to pay off your debt, and help you get back on your feet. But you need to be willing to listen to me, and you need to be willing to follow my plan." My son nodded, and I could see the hope in his eyes. He knew he needed my help, and he was willing to do whatever it took to get it. I smiled, and said, "Good. Then let's get started. First, we're going to make a budget. We're going to cut back on all of your unnecessary expenses, and we're going to put as much money as possible towards your debt." My son nodded, and I could see the determination in his eyes. He was ready to do whatever it took to get out of debt. I pulled out a piece of paper, and began to make a list of all of his expenses. As we worked, I could feel the tension building. My son was nervous, and he was scared. He knew he was in trouble, and he didn't know how to get out of it. But I was determined to help him. I was determined to teach him the value of money, and the importance of responsibility. I was determined to help him get out of debt, and back on his feet. As we worked, I could feel the tension building. My son was getting more and more agitated, and I could tell he was on the verge of a breakdown. Finally, he slammed his fist on the table and said, "I don't know how to do this, Dad. I don't know how to get out of debt." I looked at him, and I could see the fear in his eyes. He was scared, and he was overwhelmed. I reached out and put my hand on his shoulder. "It's okay, son," I said. "We'll get through this together. We'll make a plan, and we'll stick to it. You'll be debt-free in no time." My son looked at me, and I could see the hope in his eyes. He knew he needed my help, and he was willing to do whatever it took to get it. But as we sat there, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. My son was hiding something from me, and I didn't know what it was. I could feel it in my gut, and I knew I had to get to the bottom of it. I looked at my son and said, "There's something you're not telling me, isn't there?" My son looked at me, and I could see the guilt in his eyes. He knew he was hiding something, and he was scared of getting caught. I leaned forward and said, "What is it, son? What are you hiding from me?" My son looked at me, and I could see the fear in his eyes. He knew he was in trouble, and he didn't know how to get out of it. And then, just as he was about to tell me, the phone rang. My son's eyes lit up, and he said, "I'll get it." He got up and answered the phone. As he talked, I could see the tension building. He was talking to someone, and he was getting more and more agitated. Finally, he hung up the phone and turned to me. His eyes were wild, and his face was pale. "What's wrong?" I asked him. He looked at me and said, "It's the bank. They're foreclosing on my house." I felt a shock run through me, and I knew that things were about to get a lot worse. "What do you mean they're foreclosing on your house?" I asked my son, trying to keep my voice calm. My son looked at me, and I could see the panic in his eyes. "I mean, I'm behind on my mortgage payments, and the bank is taking action. They're going to sell my house and use the money to pay off the debt." I felt a wave of anger wash over me. How could my son have let things get this bad? "Why didn't you tell me about this?" I demanded. My son looked down, shamefaced. "I was too embarrassed, Dad. I didn't know how to tell you." I sighed, trying to calm myself down. This wasn't the time for recriminations. "Okay, let's think this through. We need to come up with a plan to stop the foreclosure." My son nodded, looking relieved. "I've already talked to a lawyer, and he said we can try to negotiate with the bank. Maybe they'll agree to a payment plan or something." I nodded, thinking, "That's a good idea. But we need to move fast. How much time do we have before the foreclosure goes through?" My son checked the letter from the bank. "It says here that we have 30 days to come up with a plan. If we don't, the bank will take possession of the house." I felt a sense of urgency wash over me. 30 days wasn't a lot of time. We needed to act fast. I stood up, and my son followed suit. "Okay, let's get to work. We'll call the lawyer and set up a meeting with the bank. We'll do everything we can to stop this foreclosure." My son nodded, looking determined. "I'll do whatever it takes, Dad. I don't want to lose my house." I put a hand on his shoulder. "We'll get through this, son. We'll figure out a way to save your house." But as we walked out of the kitchen, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were running out of time. The bank was not going to give us an extension without a fight. We needed to come up with a solid plan, and fast. I pulled out my phone and dialed the lawyer's number. "Hello, this is John," a voice said on the other end of the line. "John, it's me, your client's father. We need to talk about the foreclosure." "Ah, yes. I've been expecting your call. What can I do for you?" I explained the situation, and the lawyer listened thoughtfully. "I think we can work something out with the bank," he said. "But we need to move fast. Can you come in tomorrow and we'll discuss the details?" I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "We'll be there." "What time?" "How about 10 a.m.? I agreed, and we hung up the phone. I turned to my son, who was watching me anxiously. We have a meeting with the lawyer tomorrow at 10 a.m. We'll go over the plan and see what we can do to stop the foreclosure. My son nodded, looking relieved. Thanks, Dad. I don't know what I would do without you. I smiled, trying to reassure him. You'll never have to find out, son. We'll get through this together. But as we walked back into the kitchen, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were in for a long and difficult fight. The bank was not going to give up easily, and we needed to be prepared for anything. I looked at my son and saw the determination in his eyes. We were in this together, and we would fight to the end to save his house. But as we sat back down at the table, I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. A piece of paper on the table, with a name and address on it. A name and address that I recognized. My son's eyes met mine, and I could see the guilt in them. What was he hiding from me? And who was this person? I felt a surge of adrenaline as I picked up the piece of paper and examined it more closely. The name and address on it belonged to a woman, someone I had never heard of before. But what caught my attention was the notation on the bottom of the page: meet me at the usual place at 5 p.m. J. My son's eyes met mine, and I could see the fear in them. He knew he had been caught. Who is this? I demanded, trying to keep my voice calm. My son hesitated, then looked down at the floor. It's just someone I know, Dad, he muttered. I felt a wave of anger wash over me. Don't lie to me, I said, my voice rising. I can see the guilt written all over your face. Who is she? My son sighed, then looked up at me. Her name is Julia, he said. We met online a few months ago, and we've been seeing each other ever since. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. My son was in deep financial trouble, and now I find out he's been secretly seeing some woman? What does she have to do with your financial problems? I asked, trying to keep my cool. My son hesitated, then said, She's been helping me out, Dad. She's been lending me money to pay my bills. I felt a cold dread creeping up my spine. This was not good. How much money has she lent you? I asked, my voice tight with anger. My son looked down at the floor again. A lot, Dad, he muttered. I don't know how I'm going to pay her back. I felt like I was going to explode. My son was in debt to this woman, and now he was facing foreclosure? This was a disaster. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down. We need to talk to her, I said. We need to figure out what's going on and how we can fix this. My son nodded, looking relieved. I'll call her, Dad, he said. I'll set up a meeting for tomorrow. I nodded, feeling a sense of unease. What was I getting myself into? I didn't know anything about this woman, or what her motives were. But I knew one thing: I was going to get to the bottom of this. I was going to find out what was going on, and I was going to fix it. The next day, my son and I sat in the lawyer's office, waiting for Julia to arrive. I was nervous, not knowing what to expect. But as the door opened and Julia walked in, I felt a surge of surprise. She was beautiful, with long blonde hair and piercing green eyes. But it was her confidence that really caught my attention. She walked into the room like she owned the place, and I could tell she was used to getting what she wanted. Hello, she said, smiling at my son. I see you're in a bit of a bind. My son nodded, looking sheepish. Yeah, I am, he said. But my dad is here to help me out. Julia's eyes met mine, and I could see the calculation in them. She was sizing me up, wondering what I was capable of. Ah, wonderful, she said. I'm sure we can come to some sort of arrangement. I felt a sense of unease as Julia sat down and began to explain her proposal. It was clear that she was a shrewd businesswoman, and she knew exactly what she was doing. But as I listened to her plan, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Something didn't add up. And I was determined to find out what it was. As Julia continued to explain her proposal, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. She was offering to help my son pay off his debts, but at a steep price. She wanted a significant percentage of his income, and she was willing to take drastic measures to ensure she got it. I knew I had to be careful, but I also knew that I had to do something to help my son. He was in a desperate situation, and I couldn't just sit back and watch him lose everything. "I'm not sure this is a good idea," I said, trying to sound calm. Julia smiled, her eyes glinting with amusement. "Oh, come now," she said. "You're not going to let a little thing like pride stand in the way of saving your son's house, are you?" I felt a surge of anger, but I kept my cool. "I just want to make sure we're doing the right thing," I said. Julia leaned forward, her voice taking on a persuasive tone. "Trust me, I'm offering you a good deal," she said. "You won't find anyone else willing to help your son out of this mess." I looked at my son, who was watching the exchange with a mixture of fear and hope. I knew I had to make a decision, and fast. "Okay," I said finally. "We'll do it." Julia smiled, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "Excellent," she said. "I'll have my lawyer draw up the papers, and we can finalize the deal tomorrow." I nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. Maybe this was the answer to our prayers. Maybe Julia could really help us out of this mess. But as I left the lawyer's office with my son, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Julia seemed too good to be true, and I had a nagging sense of doubt that I couldn't ignore. I pushed the thoughts aside, telling myself I was just being paranoid. But as we walked to the car, I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. A black SUV was parked across the street, its tinted windows reflecting the sunlight. And as we got into our car and drove away, I could have sworn I saw the SUV follow us. I glanced in the rearview mirror, my heart racing. What was going on? Was Julia's proposal really as innocent as it seemed? I didn't have any answers, but I knew one thing for sure: I was going to find out. Over the next few days, I noticed that the SUV was always lurking in the background. It was always parked across the street from our house, and I could swear I saw it following us whenever we left the house. I tried to brush it off as paranoia, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. And then, one night, I received a mysterious phone call. The voice on the other end was distorted, but the message was clear. "You're in over your head," the voice said. "Get out while you still can." I felt a chill run down my spine as I hung up the phone. Who was behind this? And what did they want? I knew I had to be careful, but I also knew I couldn't back down now. I had to see this through, no matter what. The next day, I went to Julia's office to sign the papers. As I sat down at her desk, I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. A photo on her desk, showing her standing next to a man I recognized. A man who was supposed to be dead. I felt a surge of adrenaline as I stared at the photo. The man standing next to Julia was someone I had known for years, someone I had thought was dead. How was this possible? I looked up at Julia, who was watching me with a curious expression. "What's wrong?" she asked. I hesitated, unsure of how to react. Part of me wanted to confront her, to demand answers. But another part of me was scared of what I might find out. "Just a photo," I said finally, trying to play it cool. Julia smiled, her eyes glinting with amusement. "Oh, that," she said. "That's just an old friend. Someone I knew from my past." I raised an eyebrow, skeptical. "An old friend?" I repeated. Julia nodded, her expression innocent. "Yes, that's all. Don't worry about it." But I was worried. I was worried because I knew that the man in the photo was not just anyone. He was someone with a reputation, someone who was feared and respected. And if Julia was associated with him, then that meant she was not what she seemed. I felt a chill run down my spine as I realized the truth. Julia was not just a businesswoman, not just someone who was trying to help my son. She was something more, something sinister. And I had just made a deal with her. I tried to push the thoughts aside, to focus on the task at hand. But as I signed the papers, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just made a terrible mistake. The rest of the day was a blur. I went through the motions, but my mind was elsewhere. I was thinking about Julia, thinking about the man in the photo. Who was she, really? And what did she want? I didn't have any answers, but I knew I had to find out. As I left Julia's office, I felt a sense of unease. I knew I had to be careful, to watch my back. Because if Julia was not what she seemed, then that meant I was in grave danger. I walked back to my car, my heart racing with anticipation. What was I going to do next? I didn't know, but I knew I had to do something. I had to uncover the truth about Julia, about the man in the photo. And I had to do it before it was too late. As I drove home, I noticed that the SUV was following me again. I felt a surge of adrenaline, my heart racing with fear. Who was behind this? And what did they want? I didn't know, but I knew I had to lose them. I took a sharp turn, trying to shake the SUV off my tail. But it followed me, relentless. I took another turn, and another, but it was always there. I was starting to get desperate, starting to feel trapped. And then, just as I was about to give up, I saw a chance. I took a sharp turn into a narrow alleyway, hoping to lose the SUV. And for a moment, I thought I had succeeded. The SUV didn't follow me, and I was alone. But as I caught my breath, I realized that I was not alone. There was someone else in the alleyway, someone who had been watching me. I spun around, my heart racing with fear. And that's when I saw him, the man from the photo. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. The man from the photo was standing right in front of me, his eyes gleaming with a sinister light. I tried to speak, but my voice caught in my throat. He took a step closer to me, his smile growing wider. "You're a hard man to find," he said, his voice dripping with malice. I tried to back away, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. He took another step closer, his eyes glinting with amusement. "You see, I've been watching you," he said. "I've been watching you and your son, and I must say, I'm impressed. You're quite the player, aren't you?" I felt a surge of anger, but I was too scared to move. He took another step closer, his breath hot on my face. "You see, I've been playing a game with you," he said. "A game of cat and mouse. And you're just a pawn." I felt a cold dread creeping up my spine. What did he mean? What game was he talking about? He took another step closer, his eyes glinting with triumph. "You see, I'm the one who's been behind all of this," he said. "I'm the one who's been manipulating you and your son. And I've been doing it all for one reason, revenge." I felt like I had been punched in the gut again. Revenge? What did he mean? He took another step closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You see, I used to work with your son's father," he said. "We were business partners, and we made a fortune together. But then, your son's father betrayed me. He stole from me, and he left me for dead." I felt a surge of shock. This was the man who had been behind the embezzlement scheme. The man who had ruined my son's life. He took another step closer, his eyes glinting with hatred. "And now, I've finally found a way to get my revenge," he said. "I've been using Julia to manipulate you and your son. And I've been using the SUV to keep an eye on you." I felt like I was going to pass out. This was too much to take. But then, something inside of me snapped. I felt a surge of anger and determination. I was not going to let this man get away with this. I was not going to let him ruin my son's life. I took a deep breath, and I stood up straight. "You're not going to get away with this," I said, my voice firm. "You're not going to ruin my son's life." The man sneered at me, but I could see the fear in his eyes. He knew he had been caught. He knew he was going to pay for what he had done. And then, just as I was about to call the police, I saw Julia. She was standing behind the man, a look of shock on her face. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling. The man turned to her, his eyes blazing with anger. "You fool," he spat. "You think you can betray me and get away with it?" Julia took a step back, her eyes wide with fear. "I didn't know," she said. "I didn't know what you were planning." The man sneered at her, but I could see the anger in his eyes. He knew he had been betrayed. He knew he was going to pay for what he had done. And then, just as I was about to call the police, the man made a run for it. He tried to escape, but I was too quick. I grabbed him, and I held him in a tight grip. "You're not going anywhere," I said, my voice firm. The police arrived a few minutes later, and they took the man away. As I watched him being led away in handcuffs, I felt a sense of satisfaction. Karma had finally caught up with him. He had tried to ruin my son's life, but in the end, he had ended up ruining his own.